I swear. Someone's hurting that child. I heard her scream. Then something slammed like a body hitting the wall. The 911 dispatcher's fingers froze for half a second before typing the details. Can you confirm the address, ma'am? The White House on Magnolia Drive. Corner lot. Same place I called about last week. That child. Tonight, it sounded like she wasn't going to survive. Officer Joan Monroe set her coffee down, heart tightening. It was her third call from Silver Oak in 2 weeks. She'd walked the halls of that home once before. Sleek, cold, tidy. But something about it had felt wrong. Too quiet. Too polished. Monroe adjusted her badge and glanced at her young partner, Delgado. Same house, she said flatly. We're going back. They arrived as dusk dimmed the neighborhood's white fences and trimmed hedges. The sprinklers clicked in the distance, and warm lights glowed behind heavy curtains. From the outside, it looked like success lived here, but Monroe knew better. She knocked twice, firm and calm. The door cracked open, and Rachel appeared in a silk robe, her hair immaculate, a half-filled glass of red wine in hand. Yes? She asked sweetly. Officer Monroe. Ma'am, we received a report of loud screaming. We'd like to speak with the child and do a welfare check. Rachel gave a tight smile. Anna's overstimulated. She's adopted, has trauma responses, screams when she's anxious. Monroe nodded politely. We still need to see her. Rachel hesitated. For half a second, a twitch flickered in her jaw. She's resting. I gave her something to sleep. With a doctor's prescription? Benadryl, Rachel said, her tone clipped. It's legal. Ma'am, please step aside, Monroe said, voice now edged with authority. We're going upstairs. Rachel sighed and opened the door fully. The house inside was immaculate. Too immaculate. Monroe spotted Diana, the housekeeper, in the corner, wiping a perfectly clean counter. Her eyes met Monroe's for a moment, full of unspoken things. Monroe started up the stairs. Third door on the right. It had a sliding bolt on the outside. Again. This room locked? Monroe asked. She locks herself in when she's overwhelmed, Rachel said behind her, tone sweet as syrup. It's what her therapist recommends. Isolation therapy. Monroe frowned. Isolation therapy for a 6-year-old? She slid the bolt back. The door creaked open. The stench hit her like a punch. Rot, mold, sweat. And something else, ammonia. The thick, sour smell of urine soaked deep into fabric. The room was dark and humid, the air barely breathable. Walls bare. A single bare mattress with brown stains. No toys. No books. And then she saw her. In the far corner, crouched low, a small figure trembled, her knees tucked to her chest. Her left ankle was chained, yes, chained to a rusted iron ring bolted into the wall. The girl was barely clothed, her hair matted, skin pale and bruised. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Let us know what you think in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you believe stories like this matter, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment that touches the heart. Jesus Christ. Delgado murmured behind Monroe. Monroe stepped forward slowly. Anna? The girl flinched, not speaking. Her lips were cracked, her eyes huge and terrified. She fell down the stairs. Rachel said casually from behind them. She bites. We had to restrain her. That's not illegal, is it? Monroe spun around. You chained a child to a wall. Rachel shrugged, glass still in hand. It's my house. I do what's necessary. Without another word, Monroe pulled her cuffs. Rachel Ellington, you are under arrest for felony child endangerment, unlawful restraint, and suspicion of abuse. Rachel's eyes widened. You can't arrest me. You have no warrant. My husband's an attorney. Monroe locked the cuffs around her wrists. Rachel began to struggle, yanking, kicking wildly. She's not even my real daughter, she shouted. You have no idea what it's like. She screams all night like a damn animal. Delgado stepped in as Rachel tried to twist free. Ma'am, stop resisting. Resisting? She hissed. You're resisting the truth. Monroe looked her dead in the eye. We're rescuing a child. Diana had appeared at the doorway, silently crying. "Is she hurt?" she whispered. "She's alive," Monroe said. "That's more than we can say for this woman's soul." Paramedics arrived within minutes, cutting the chain carefully. Anna didn't speak, didn't cry. She only reached, slowly, toward Monroe's hand. A tremor ran through the officer's spine as the small fingers gripped her own. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors whispered. A man with a dog clutched his leash tightly and said under his breath, "We all heard the screams. None of us did a damn thing." Monroe turned, cradling Anna gently. "She screamed for help," she said, her voice heavy. And the walls kept the secret. Tonight, they weren't quiet anymore. The emergency lights flashed red and white across the pristine walls of Silver Oak as the paramedics carried Anna out on a soft stretcher. Her small frame was wrapped tightly in a thermal blanket. But she didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared up into the night sky, eyes wide open, blinking only when the cold wind brushed her lashes. Officer Monroe walked beside her, hand still resting gently on the girl's arm. "You're safe now, honey," she murmured. "No one's gonna lock you up again." Anna blinked once, but her lips remained sealed. Diana, the housekeeper, watched from the porch, trembling. She hadn't spoken a word since Monroe's arrest of Rachel. But as the girl was wheeled past, she took one hesitant step forward. "She's always been quiet," Diana whispered. But this past week, she stopped eating. Wouldn't even touch the peanut butter sandwiches I made, the only thing she liked. Monroe turned to face her fully. "You knew something was wrong." "I did," Diana confessed. "But I needed this job. My husband passed last year. I've been barely holding on." Monroe's voice softened. "You're holding on now. And you did the right thing tonight." Diana nodded slowly, eyes welling. "Will she be okay?" Monroe glanced toward the ambulance. "She'll need time and help, but she has both now." At the hospital, the nurses worked quietly, gently removing the grime and bandaging the bruises. Monroe stayed just outside the room, arms crossed, jaw tight. Delgado stood beside her, still pale. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. "The chain." Monroe shook her head. She wasn't being punished. She was being erased. "Oh, she didn't even look at Rachel as they cuffed her," Delgado added. "No fear. Like she was already somewhere else." "That's what long-term abuse does," Monroe said. "It teaches kids that pain is normal. That silence is survival." They were silent a moment before Monroe stepped back from the window. "I want someone with her around the clock. Until CPS gets here." "Already called," Delgado said. "They'll be here by morning." But Monroe didn't leave. She couldn't. She walked into the room slowly. Anna lay still, hooked to an IV, her feet bandaged where the chain had rubbed raw. Her curls had been washed and combed gently by the nurses, but the shadows in her eyes remained. "Hey there," Monroe said, sitting beside her. "My name's Joan. I'm a police officer, but more than that. I'm someone who listens." No response. "You don't have to talk, but I'll be here, if you want to." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small keychain shaped like a star. The kind given at community events. "This is yours now. A star. Because you are one." Anna stared at it. "You know," Monroe said, voice lowering, "when I was little, I was quiet too. My mama used to say, 'Still water runs deep.' People thought I didn't notice things. But I saw everything. I just kept it in." Anna's eyes flickered just once toward Monroe's. "That's what I see in you, sweetheart. Still water, but deep, strong." Outside the room, a woman entered the hallway. Miss Louise Garner, CPS liaison for the county, early 60s, gray curls and a no-nonsense face that softened only when she was near children. "She the one from Magnolia Drive?" she asked Delgado. He nodded. "Name's Anna. 6. Adopted. No formal school enrollment for over a year. Allegations of neglect going back months. None substantiated until tonight. Louisa Sicht. Poor baby. No." Back inside, Monroe noticed something. Anna was fidgeting under the blanket. One small hand moved toward the nightstand drawer. Monroe opened it for her. Inside was a single crayon broken and a paper napkin from the ambulance. Anna reached for it slowly and began to draw, pressing hard. Monroe leaned in. The lines were rough, jagged. First a house, then a girl, then chains. But then, she drew a woman holding the chains open. Monroe blinked hard, clearing her throat. "Is that me?" Anna gave the faintest nod. Monroe smiled through a tear. "You've got a gift." That night, back in her patrol car, Monroe wrote her report. Words like restraint, malnourished, psychological trauma. But those words felt too clinical for the horror she'd just witnessed. She paused, then added her own note at the end. The child demonstrated resilience and silence, both learned under duress. "I recommend immediate placement in a trauma-informed care environment, preferably with someone trained in nonverbal developmental recovery. This girl has something to say. We just need to give her the space to speak." As Monroe signed off, she looked out into the dark streets of the neighborhood where this all began. Lights were still on at some houses. People watching, listening now, but only after the silence had been broken. She gripped the steering wheel. This wasn't just another call. This was a crack in the glass. And behind it, more shadows. And Monroe wasn't done. Not yet. The morning sun crept slowly over the rooftops of Silver Oak, bathing the quiet streets in soft gold. But inside the police station, the air was already humming with energy. Phones rang, keyboards clacked, and somewhere in the back, a printer groaned to life. Officer Monroe stood at the whiteboard in the incident room, red marker in hand, scribbling notes beneath the title. Anna, Case 4087B. Delgado walked in, 2 coffee cups in hand. He offered one to Monroe, who accepted it with a nod. "CPS picked Anna up early this morning," he said. "Louise Garner took her personally. Said she's staying at the transitional care home near Willow Creek, the one with trauma specialists." Monroe exhaled with quiet relief. "Good. She'll need more than food and a warm bed. That girl's got ghosts." Delgado shifted uncomfortably. They booked Rachel Ellington on 3 felony counts: unlawful restraint, endangerment, and abuse. "Her lawyer's already making noise. Says we mishandled the arrest, no warrant, excessive force." Monroe smirked. "He can make all the noise he wants. That room stank like fear, and no jury in the state will overlook a 6-year-old chained to a wall." "Still," Delgado said, "we need more than emotion. They'll fight dirty." Monroe nodded slowly, tapping the red marker against her chin. "Then we find what they can't fight: truth." Just then, a soft knock echoed from the doorway. Diana. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, holding a plastic grocery bag. Her eyes looked tired, but there was a resolve in her shoulders that hadn't been there the night before. "Come in," Monroe said gently. "I brought this," Diana said, holding up the bag. "Anna's drawings. The ones she used to make before Rachel moved her into that room. I kept them. I wasn't sure why, but now, I think they mean something." Monroe took the bag and opened it carefully. Inside were crumpled sheets of sketch paper, some with faint pencil lines, others colored in broken crayon strokes. A few were just messy circles. But others, "She always drew houses," Diana said softly. "But look at the windows." Monroe scanned the drawings. In every picture, the house had no windows, just blank walls, no doors either, just a box. "She saw that place as a prison," Monroe whispered. Diana nodded. "And look at this one." She pulled out a folded sheet. On it was a stick figure girl, curly hair, small body sitting inside a box. Outside the box stood a woman with sharp lines for fingers, a dark scribble for a mouth. Red crayon streaked across the arms. "She told me once," Diana said, voice cracking, "that the lady eats the sunshine." I didn't know what she meant. Monroe felt a cold chill. She was trying to describe how Rachel made her feel, like the light went away when she entered the room. She was never allowed to go outside, Diana added. Rachel told the neighbors she was sensitive to UV rays. Said it was medical. But it was just control. Monroe looked up sharply. "Can you testify to all this?" Diana hesitated. "If I do, I'll lose everything. The agency I work for, my reputation, it'll all go up in flames. Rachel's husband has deep ties. real estate, banks, politicians. Then we burn carefully, Monroe said. But Diana, that little girl thinks you're the only person who ever tried to protect her. That counts for something. Diana stared at the floor. Then she nodded, slow but steady. I'll testify. Later that afternoon, Monroe and Delgado returned to the Ellington residence with a search warrant in hand. The chain, the bolt, and the condition of the room had fast-tracked approval. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Rachel's husband, William Ellington, had returned from his business trip and sat on the sofa in a tailored suit, face blank, fingers locked. He didn't rise to greet them. Mr. Ellington, Monroe said, we have a warrant to search the home for any items connected to the abuse of your adopted daughter. He nodded mutely. As they moved room to room, Delgado paused in the study. Ma'am, over here. Inside a locked drawer, they found a leather-bound journal. Monroe opened it and skimmed. It wasn't Rachel's, it was William's. Inside were dated entries cold. Clinical observations of Anna's behavior. The 15th of October. She bit again. Unteachable. Recommend continued isolation. The 3rd of November. Sleep disruptions from her screaming. Rachel tried restraint method. No visible injury. December 9. Diana continues to question Rachel's methods. Dangerous. Monroe's hands clenched. This wasn't neglect, she murmured. It was calculated. She turned to William. You knew. You documented everything, and you did nothing. William didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the flawless lawn. That evening, Monroe returned to the precinct with both Rachel and William now implicated. As she logged the evidence, a quiet knock came at her office door. It was Diana again, holding one last drawing. She gave this to me once, months ago. I didn't understand it then. Monroe took it gently. It showed a small hand reaching through bars. Above it, scribbled in blue, were the words, "Don't forget me." Monroe's eyes stung. She thought she'd disappear, Diana whispered, like no one would remember she existed. Monroe folded the paper carefully and slid it into her case file. She won't, she said. Not on my watch. Outside, the stars began to rise. And somewhere in a safe house across town, a little girl with tired eyes lay in a soft bed, holding a plastic sheriff's star in her hand. She didn't speak yet, but she was beginning to believe she'd been heard. The next morning, Officer Monroe parked her unmarked cruiser outside the Willow Creek Transitional Home, her fingers tapping the steering wheel as she stared at the modest brick building. It looked warm and inviting, with flower beds out front and hand-painted signs that read, "You're safe here, and healing starts today." But Monroe's gut churned with unease. She wasn't sure why. Anna had been here for nearly 24 hours. The CPS team had praised the staff, the facility's trauma-informed practices, even the therapists specializing in nonverbal abuse victims. By all accounts, this should have been the safest place for her. Still, Monroe felt something gnawing beneath the surface. She took a deep breath, exited the car, and walked toward the front desk. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a cardigan, looked up and smiled. "Good morning, officer. You here to check on Anna?" Monroe nodded. "Yes, just need to see how she's settling in." "She's still not speaking," the woman replied. "But she colored a little this morning, and she's eating. Small steps. Can I see her?" "Of course. Room 103, down the hall and to the left. Miss Garner's with her." Monroe walked down the quiet hallway. The walls were lined with framed artwork drawn by past residents, bright suns, trees, family portraits. But her mind remained focused. She knocked gently at the door of room 103. Louise Garner opened it, her expression warm but tired. "Joan, come in." Anna was seated cross-legged on a cushioned rug near the window, surrounded by crayons and blank paper. She glanced up when Monroe entered, her fingers hesitating above the green crayon. "Hey, Starshine," Monroe said softly. "You remember me?" Anna nodded once, eyes locking onto Monroe's, then flicking away. "She's more responsive today," Louise said. "But something's off. I've worked with kids in trauma for 30 years. Most of them draw. Anna's been drawing the same thing over and over. Monroe crouched beside her. Can I see? Anna pushed one of the papers forward. It showed a house again, square, closed off, windowless. But this time, the figure outside was different. It wasn't Rachel. It was a man, dressed in black. No face, just a dark shape. Monroe's pulse quickened. Anna. Who is this? Anna looked up, then, slowly, she turned the page over and drew a car. A black one, with tinted windows. Monroe glanced at Louise, who raised a brow. We didn't show her any photos of the Ellingtons' cars, Monroe whispered. How would she know? Anna reached for another crayon, red this time, and drew a small figure near the car. Then she drew an X over it. Monroe stood. Her instinct screamed. We need to check the facility's visitor log. Now. Not or. In the front office, Monroe reviewed the last 24 hours. As she feared, someone had signed in early that morning just before sunrise. Name: James Larson. Reason for visit: delivery. Did he leave anything? Monroe asked the receptionist. No. Said he had the wrong place. Didn't even stay 2 minutes. Security footage? The woman hesitated. We're still upgrading the system. Only partial coverage. Monroe gritted her teeth. Show me what you've got. There. The grainy footage showed a black SUV pulling up before dawn. A tall man stepped out, wearing a hat and sunglasses despite the hour. He approached the door, lingered for less than a minute, then left. But just before the camera lost him, he glanced upward right into the lens. It wasn't Rachel's husband. It wasn't Delgado. It wasn't anyone on the current suspect list. Monroe paused the video and leaned in. This man knew where she was, and he wanted her to know it. Later that evening, Monroe sat in her office, staring at the still frame of the faceless man on her monitor. She rewound the footage again, watching his posture, his gait, the way he didn't flinch under surveillance. This wasn't a delivery guy. It was a warning. Anna wasn't just abused, Monroe muttered. She was being kept quiet. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Delgado entered, holding a manila folder. Got something you should see, he said, setting it on her desk. Rachel's financials. They're a mess. Overdrawn accounts, secret payments to private educational specialists, one of whom doesn't exist in any registry. But that's not all. He flipped to the final page. Turns out Rachel wasn't Anna's first foster placement. She was her third. Monroe's eyes narrowed. And the first two? Untraceable. No formal reports. No confirmed handoffs. It's like she was passed around off the books. Like property, Monroe whispered. Delgado nodded grimly. Or a secret. Monroe sat back, heart pounding. Someone's been hiding this child. Not just abusing her. Silencing her. She stood abruptly. We need to find out who signed off on her adoption. Pull the full history. Every transfer, every social worker who touched this file. Something's rotten in this system. Delgado hesitated. You think it's deeper than just Rachel? Monroe nodded. I think Anna saw something. Or someone. And they've been trying to erase her ever since. That night, long after the station lights dimmed and the phones went quiet, Monroe stared at the crayon drawing Anna had given her. The faceless man. The black car. The X. Anna couldn't speak it yet, but she was drawing the truth, and someone out there was terrified of what she might one day say. The next day dawned gray and restless, with a low fog rolling through the hills around Silver Oak. Officer Monroe sat in the backseat of a CPS vehicle parked outside Anna's former residence, her eyes scanning the windows of the pristine White House. Delgado stood nearby, speaking with a locksmith who was preparing to open the basement access door, an area that hadn't been searched during the initial sweep. The team had returned with a new warrant. This time, they weren't just checking for signs of abuse. They were looking for history documents, photographs, anything that could explain why Anna had been hidden, passed between homes, erased from records. The evidence so far whispered of something bigger than bad parenting. Inside the house, silence reigned. Rachel Ellington was in county jail, awaiting trial. William Ellington, The man who had documented his adopted daughter's pain like it was data on a spreadsheet had posted bail but refused to speak. The house now stood like a dollhouse with the lights turned off, still pretty, but lifeless. Monroe walked slowly through the halls, memories from that first night flashing in her mind. The clean surfaces, the absence of toys, the eerie scent of bleach. Everything felt too intentional, too polished, as though someone had scrubbed the soul out of the place. In the living room, Diana stood by the mantel, arms folded. CPS had asked her to return to assist in identifying unfamiliar items, but her face told Monroe this was more than routine. "You okay?" Monroe asked. Diana nodded slowly. "I never heard laughter in this house. Not once. Not from her." Monroe looked around. "Even sad homes have moments of laughter. But not here, huh?" Diana's lips pressed into a thin line. It was like joy wasn't allowed. Just then, the locksmith called out, "Got it, officers. Basement's open." Monroe and Delgado followed him down the narrow stairs. The air shifted quickly, cooler, damper, heavier. The walls were unfinished cement, with rows of storage bins lining one side. A single overhead bulb flickered as it warmed up. Delgado shined his flashlight toward a far corner. Back here, they found an old trunk, dusty and locked with a rusted latch. Monroe cracked it open. Inside were manila folders, dated envelopes, and dozens of photos. She pulled out one photo. It was Anna, but younger, maybe 4, standing beside a woman who was not Rachel. The woman's face was blurred from age, but Anna's expression was unmistakable. Cautious, eyes distant. Behind them was a sign. Brookfield Foster Home. Monroe flipped the photo. A date. The 3rd of February, 2021. Delgado handed her one of the folders. "Look at this." Inside were records from Brookfield, a foster agency shuttered 2 years ago for undisclosed compliance failures. The records listed Anna under a different last name, Anna Coleman. No adoption paperwork, no court files. Just an abrupt notation. Transferred to private care. Ellington, R. The 22nd of June 2021. No judge signed this, Monroe murmured. This wasn't legal. She pulled more photos. Anna at different ages, different homes. Always the same expression, the same quiet eyes. A child floating through life without anchor. Someone used this girl, Monroe said, shuffled her through loopholes until no one remembered who she belonged to. Delgado found a small tape recorder, tucked beneath the folders. He hit play. Static filled the room, followed by a male voice. Calm. Cold. She doesn't speak. That's the advantage. They can't accuse you of lies she never told. Monroe's eyes widened. That's William. Delgado nodded grimly. He knew she was being silenced. And he preferred it that way. They took everything. Photos, tapes, papers. It was enough to push for a deeper investigation into Brookfield, into William's real connections, maybe even into the judge who never signed the adoption. As they climbed back into the car, Diana leaned into the passenger window. She used to cry in her sleep, every night. I'd listen through the door. I wasn't brave enough then. Monroe looked her square in the eye. You're brave now. You came back. Back at the precinct, Monroe spread the documents across a large table. Louise Garner joined her, eyes scanning the files. This isn't just abuse, Louise said. This is systemic failure. Someone profited off keeping her invisible. Monroe nodded. Or protected someone else. Louise touched one photo gently. We need to find the original foster placement. Someone out there remembers the beginning. Not just the damage, how it started. That night, Monroe sat at home, a whiskey untouched on the table beside her. She flipped slowly through the photos again. One caught her eye, a Polaroid, old and faded, showing a group of children in a playground. In the back, nearly out of frame, was Anna, staring at something just beyond the camera. There was something in her eyes, not just fear, recognition. Monroe leaned in. Someone had been there. Someone Anna remembered. She picked up her phone and called Delgado. We're not done. Another lead? Number another child. He paused. You think there's more? I don't think, Monroe said, her voice low. I know. Anna hadn't just survived a bad home. She'd survived a network. And that network wasn't finished yet. Officer Monroe leaned forward in her chair, eyes fixed on the photograph beneath her reading lamp. The image was grainy children playing on a run-down metal playground, but her focus stayed locked on the girl in the background. Anna, unmistakable even then, barely 5 years old, watching someone out of frame, not frightened, focused. Delgado stepped into the office, holding a brown folder. You were right, he said. Brookfield didn't just close. It was dismantled. Quietly. 4 weeks after an internal complaint was filed, Monroe looked up. By who? Delgado opened the file. A volunteer teacher. Name was Melody Kane. She worked with literacy development for foster kids, ran a story circle once a week, filed a report claiming certain children were disappearing without explanation. She was fired 2 days later, accused of trespassing, even though she had signed access. Where is she now? Lives upstate. Moved after her contract was terminated. I've got an address. Monroe stood, slipping into her jacket. We're going. They arrived at a modest cabin nestled in the pines of Valemont, a quiet town 2 hours north of Silver Oak. Melody Kane answered the door in slippers and a college sweatshirt, her hair silvering at the edges, but her eyes sharp. I figured someone would come, she said before they could speak. Took you long enough. Monroe stepped forward. We're looking into a child who passed through Brookfield. Anna, 6 years old, quiet, brown eyes, curly hair. Melody's face shifted. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened the door fully and motioned them inside. My girls called her the Shadow, she said, pouring tea into cracked mugs. She was always there, but nobody noticed her. Except one. One? Monroe asked. Melody nodded. Another girl. Her name was Kelsey. She was a firecracker, loud, fearless. Always wore a yellow dress, even when it was freezing. She used to protect Anna. Saturday next to her, every story hour, said Anna was her sister, even though they weren't blood. Do you know what happened to Kelsey? Melody's hand trembled slightly as she set down the teapot. She vanished. Overnight. No explanation. Her file was erased the next day. When I asked about it, they said she'd been relocated to a private family in Michigan. But CPS had no record, no trail. Monroe exchanged a glance with Delgado. I knew something was off, Melody continued. Anna changed after that. She stopped sitting near the other kids, stopped coloring. I tried to reach her, but it was like part of her had gone missing. Did you report it? Of course I did. That's why I was fired. The woman who ran Brookfield, Margot Vale, called me a liability, said I was interfering with placements. Told me I'd never work in child welfare again. Monroe took a breath. We need to find Margot Vale. Melody shook her head. She disappeared right after Brookfield closed. But before she did, she had private meetings with a man who drove a black SUV. Every Thursday evening. Same man. Always stayed outside. Monroe stiffened. Did you ever see his face? Melody frowned. Once. He looked straight at me when I stepped out for air. He didn't smile, just tipped his hat. Coldest eyes I've ever seen. Later that evening, back in the precinct, Monroe uploaded the Brookfield photo into the facial recognition system. Delgado cross-referenced known associates of the Ellingtons. It wasn't long before a name popped up. Marshall Denning, Delgado said, former lobbyist. Ties to private child placement networks. No formal employment now, but several shell companies linked to child welfare grants. Monroe's mouth tightened. So this man, he's the link between Brookfield, the Ellingtons, and possibly whoever moved Kelsey. She stood, heart pounding. He's not just a ghost from Anna's past. He's part of the reason she ended up in chains. Delgado hesitated. You think she saw him? That she remembers? She drew him, Monroe replied. Faceless. But she knew. That kind of fear sticks. The next day, Monroe returned to Willow Creek Transitional Home with one goal: to let Anna guide them. She walked quietly into room 103, where Anna sat cross-legged by the window, scribbling with a broken blue crayon. "Hey, sweetheart," Monroe said softly. "Can I sit with you?" Anna nodded without looking up. Monroe pulled a photo from her pocket. It was the playground shot again. She handed it gently to Anna. "You remember this?" Anna stared at the photo for several long seconds. Her fingers trembled slightly. Then, she tapped the figure in the yellow dress. "Kelsey?" Monroe asked. Anna nodded once. "Do you know where she went?" Anna picked up the red crayon. Slowly, deliberately, she drew a large X over the photo. Monroe's voice caught. "Do you think she's gone?" Anna shook her head. Monroe leaned closer. "Do you think someone took her?" Anna looked up. For the first time in days, she spoke. Her voice was small, dry. He said, "Don't tell." Monroe froze. "Who, Anna?" Anna's eyes welled. "The man with no face." Monroe's chest tightened. "What did he do?" Anna whispered. "Took her away. In the night. Told me, if I talk, he'd come back." Monroe gently took her hand. "You're safe now. You did the right thing." Anna pulled something from beneath her pillow, a folded paper. Inside was a child's map, drawn in crayon, trees, a road, a house, and in shaky letters, Kelsey's place. Monroe stared at it. Hope Anna hadn't forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, Kelsey was still out there, waiting to be found. Officer Monroe drove in silence. Anna's crayon map spread across the passenger seat like a treasure from a forgotten world. The child's lines were shaky but deliberate, trees clustered on the left. A long road drawn in brown. And at the end, a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. Above it, in blocky letters, she had written, "Kelsey's place." It was the first lead in weeks that felt both real and untainted by bureaucracy. Delgado called over the radio. "I cross-checked the drawing. Based on tree lines and old CPS transfers, there's a rural address near Pike Hollow that fits. Abandoned farmhouse, used to be part of a community placement program before funding dried up." "How long has it been off the books?" Monroe asked. "Since 2019. No known occupants. But someone's been paying the taxes, cash deposits through a trust linked to one of Marshall Denning's shell corps." Monroe's grip on the wheel tightened. "We're going now." Pike Hollow was 2 hours west, tucked between a dry creek bed and the remains of a failed timber town. As Monroe and Delgado turned down the cracked dirt road, dust billowed behind them. The trees were exactly as Anna had drawn them, dense, leaning, protective like arms around the landscape. When the house finally came into view, Monroe felt her pulse quicken. It was small, leaning slightly to one side, but intact. A chimney jutted upward from the roof like a stubborn tooth. No cars, no mailbox, no visible signs of life. They parked a quarter-mile back and approached on foot. Weapons holstered, but ready. The porch creaked under Monroe's boots as she stepped up. She raised her hand and knocked. No answer. Delgado moved around to the side, peering through a cracked window. "Someone's living here. There's food, blankets, a lantern." Monroe tried the doorknob. Unlocked. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and dust. Everything was sparse but neat. On a small table sat a half-finished peanut butter sandwich. On the wall, children's drawings, tacked with care. One of them showed 2 girls holding hands. One in a yellow dress, one with curly hair. "Kelsey," Monroe whispered, "and Anna." Delgado's voice dropped. "There's a room in the back. Someone's in there." Monroe stepped forward slowly and pushed the door open. A girl no more than 10 stood frozen beside a cot. Her yellow dress was faded and patched, her hair pulled into uneven braids. In her hand, she held a rusted metal spoon, lifted like a weapon. "It's okay," Monroe said, lowering herself to one knee. "We're not here to hurt you. You're safe." The girl didn't move. Delgado gently stepped in. "Are you Kelsey?" The girl's eyes flicked between them. Her voice was small, dry from disuse. "You can't be real." Monroe's eyes softened. "We're real, Anna sent us. That name Anna shifted something. Kelsey blinked. Her lip trembled. She's alive? She's safe. She remembered you. Drew a map. Tears welled in the girl's eyes, but she didn't let go of the spoon. He said she was dead. Who, Kelsey? Monroe asked. Kelsey shook her head, eyes going distant. The man. The one with the dark eyes. He came in the night. Took the others. Delgado stepped closer. Others? Kelsey nodded slowly. 4 of us were here at first. Me, Anna, Jameer, and a baby named Lila. They said we were too damaged for normal homes, so they kept us here. No school, no phones, just rules. Monroe's voice was low. What happened to them? One by one, Kelsey whispered. They vanished. Mr. Denning said they got special placement, but I saw. One night, I woke up and saw Jameer being carried out. He didn't move. He wasn't breathing. Delgado swore under his breath. Monroe reached into her jacket and pulled out a small foil-wrapped granola bar. Here. Take this. Kelsey didn't hesitate. She devoured it quickly. Hands trembling. Do you remember anything else? Monroe asked. Something we can use to find Denning? Kelsey nodded. There's a notebook. I kept it hidden. She reached beneath a loose floorboard and pulled out a worn composition book, edges frayed. Inside were notes, names, dates, scribbled thoughts. One page had a sketch of Denning's black SUV with a partial license plate, 7 p.m., 23. We're taking her into protection, Monroe said firmly. Back at the precinct, CPS placed Kelsey in emergency care with a trauma team already working with Anna. When the 2 girls saw each other for the first time, they didn't speak. They just ran forward and held each other like survivors from the same storm. Delgado stepped back, watching the scene with quiet reverence. Monroe turned to Louise Garner. These girls are the key. They remember everything. Louise nodded. And Denning knows it. He won't stop. Monroe's eyes burned with fury. Then neither will we. That night, Monroe couldn't sleep. She stared at the notebook, flipping through the shaky handwriting, the notes on meals, punishments, whispers about where the others were taken. One name appeared twice. Candle Point. She looked it up. Candle Point was a wellness retreat for difficult children in northern Nevada now closed, founded by a nonprofit, the same nonprofit that funded Brookfield. She picked up the phone. Delgado, pack your bag. We're going to Nevada. The shadows were getting darker, but Monroe was done walking in fear. The road into northern Nevada was long, open, and unforgiving. Dust blew across the highway like ghosts with nowhere to go. Officer Monroe kept her eyes fixed on the GPS, but the real map was in her head, one stitched together by children's memories, crayon lines, and the kind of fear that burrows deep into a soul and stays. Candle Point had closed its doors 3 years ago after a financial restructuring. But there were no lawsuits, no public inquiry, no official statement from the nonprofit that funded it, just a slow, deliberate, vanishing act. Delgado drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel. You ever wonder how deep this goes? He asked, not looking at her. All the time, Monroe replied. But it's not about the depth anymore. It's about who's still buried under it. They reached the small town of Goldtree by mid-afternoon, a place forgotten by time, with one main street, a post office, and a grocery store that hadn't been remodeled since the 70s. Candle Point had been located on the outskirts. But Monroe had a hunch. Small towns remember things, even if they pretend to forget. Inside the grocery store, the cool air was a relief. Locals moved slowly through the aisles, giving them curious glances. Monroe noticed an older woman behind the checkout, her white apron smudged with flour. She watched Monroe and Delgado closely, but not with suspicion, something else. Recognition, maybe. Monroe approached her. Afternoon, ma'am? You been in Goldtree long? The woman gave a thin smile. Long enough to know you two aren't from around here. I'm Officer Joan Monroe. This is Detective Delgado. We're investigating the Candle Point facility that used to operate out near the ridge. The woman's smile faded. Place closed a while ago. We know. But we believe children were harmed there. Possibly trafficked. You remember anything? The woman wiped her hands on her apron, then leaned closer. Names don't matter out here. Folks who ran Candle Point didn't shop like normal people. They had deliveries, but sometimes, she hesitated, voice dropping, they'd send the kids in, only one at a time, always watched, always quiet. Like someone stole their voices. Do you remember any of the kids? One girl wore yellow, skinny. Big eyes, never blinked much. Another had curly hair, brown. That one she flinched at loud sounds. Like even laughter was a weapon. Monroe's throat tightened. Anna and Kelsey. The woman nodded slowly. Thought I was imagining it. But one day, the girl in yellow tried to talk to me. Slipped me a note when the staff wasn't looking. What did it say? The woman reached under the counter and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with time. She handed it to Monroe with trembling fingers. I didn't know who to give it to, didn't trust the sheriff back then, still don't. Monroe opened the envelope. Inside was a torn sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting was barely legible, but it read, "Please help. They take kids away at night. Say it's for testing, but they don't come back. My name is Kelsey." Delgado exhaled sharply. She tried, even back then. The woman's eyes misted. After that, I never saw her again. I told myself maybe they moved her to a better home. But I knew something was wrong. Do you know who was in charge of Candle Point? Monroe asked. Man named Josiah Pratt, ex-therapist, real smooth talker. Told the town he was building a place for healing. But his eyes were dead. Like he didn't believe a word he said. Monroe wrote the name down. Is he still in town? Not officially, but rumor is, he owns a cabin off the fire road near Old Miners Creek. Folks say he comes back every couple months, checks on things. Delgado looked at Monroe. We've got our next stop. Before they left, the woman handed Monroe something else. A Polaroid. I kept this, don't know why, just felt wrong to throw away. The photo showed Kelsey and Anna, younger, sitting on the grocery store's front bench. A man stood behind them, partially in frame. Only his hand and part of his sleeve were visible black wool, a silver ring with a carved falcon. Monroe's blood ran cold. She knew that ring. She'd seen it in Brookfield records. In a photo of Marshall Denning shaking hands with Margot Vale. Back on the road, Monroe studied the photo again. He was here. Watching. Delgado's voice was tight. He still is. Candle Point wasn't just a home, it was a collection point. Monroe nodded grimly. And Josiah Pratt was his inside man. They drove toward Old Miners Creek, the sun dipping low behind the mountains. The road narrowed into dirt, winding through thick pine. Finally, a cabin came into view, sturdy, quiet, smoke curling from the chimney. Someone was home. They parked behind a thicket and approached silently. Delgado took the back. Monroe crept to the front porch. As she raised her hand to knock, the door creaked open. A man stood there, tall, lean, with graying hair and eyes that didn't blink. "Officer Monroe," he said, smiling faintly. "I've been expecting you." She reached for her badge. "Josiah Pratt, you are under investigation for your role in the illegal detainment and potential trafficking of minors at Candle Point Wellness Center." Pratt didn't flinch. "And you think you'll get the truth out of me?" Monroe's eyes burned. "I don't need you to talk. I have your victims." At that, something shifted behind Pratt's expression. Just for a moment. Fear. Monroe stepped forward. "We're not asking anymore. We're here to end this." And in that moment, with the wind rising behind them and the last light of day washing the cabin in gold, Monroe knew the tide had turned. The children's whispers were becoming a roar. Josiah Pratt sat in the interrogation room with the same eerie calm he wore on his porch. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. He hadn't even protested the arrest. He just folded his hands neatly on the table and stared ahead, blinking less than a mannequin. Officer Monroe watched him from the observation room, arms crossed, heart pounding with restrained fury. "He's playing us," Delgado muttered beside her. "This guy's been trained, probably coached for years. Doesn't flinch, doesn't sweat. He's not just a therapist gone rogue. He's a gatekeeper." Monroe's eyes narrowed. Then we find the gate. They entered the room together, Monroe leading. She dropped a thick file on the table in front of him, photos, handwritten notes from Kelsey and Anna, the grocery store Polaroid with his partial reflection. "Recognize any of this?" she asked, sitting across from him. Pratt didn't look down. "You've got a lot of pictures. That doesn't mean you understand the story." Delgado leaned forward. "We understand enough. You ran Candle Point under the guise of trauma therapy, but what you were doing, quieting children, isolating them, handing them off with no records, that was trafficking. I protected them," Pratt said quietly. "From the chaos of the system." Monroe's tone hardened. "Number. You protected a pipeline. These children were inventory." He smiled faintly. "Your anger makes you clumsy, officer. You want a villain, but what you've got is a symptom." Monroe shoved the Polaroid across the table. "And this? Was Denning a symptom too?" Pratt looked at the photo. The smile faded. "He was the architect." "And you?" "I was the blueprint." They stared at him, stunned. For the first time, he blinked rapidly. As if memory was catching up, Denning chose the children, he continued. "The quiet ones, the broken ones. Ones no one would miss. My job was to soften them, keep them compliant." He handled the transfers. "Where are they now?" Monroe asked. Pratt hesitated. "Names," she pressed. "Addresses." "Where are the other children?" He stared at her. "I don't know. I wasn't given details. Only drop locations. Candle Point had hidden cameras. Denning monitored everything remotely." Delgado pulled out a flash drive. "Then explain this." He inserted it into the laptop on the table. Footage filled the screen, grainy black and white clips from inside. Candle Point. Children sleeping. Eating. Sitting in silence. But something strange emerged. In every clip, one camera blinked. Same corner. Same moment. Always just before a child vanished. Pratt swallowed. Monroe leaned in. "The camera blinked when they were taken. Why?" "That wasn't a camera," he muttered. "It was a transmitter." Delgado's jaw tightened. "A trigger? Like a signal?" "Yes," Pratt admitted. "Whoever monitored it when they blinked that feed, it meant the next child was scheduled. The lights in the hallway would flicker. We had 12 hours to prepare the child for transfer. Monroe's voice dropped. "And you did it. You prepared them. I thought they were being adopted, sent to new lives." "Don't, Lee." Pratt didn't speak. Monroe stood. "Get him out of here. Solitary, until further notice." As he was escorted out, Monroe turned to Delgado. "We've got surveillance timestamps, GPS logs. If we trace the feedback, we might find the server, the central hub." Delgado nodded. "I'll start with the old Candle Point ISP records." Meanwhile, Monroe returned to Anna and Kelsey's temporary care unit. The girls sat at a round table, coloring in silence. The room was bright and cheerful, filled with sunlight and cartoons on mute, but the air still held weight. Monroe sat beside them and gently placed the blinking footage in front of Anna. "Do you remember this?" she asked softly. Anna stared, then pointed at the screen. "He came after that," she whispered. The lights flickered. Then Jameer was gone. Monroe's heart sank. "Did you ever hear where they went?" Kelsey spoke for the first time in hours. "One night, I heard them say the name Rosefield. I thought it was a flower at first." Monroe nodded. "It's not. It's a name." That evening, Monroe called a contact at the FBI's cyber unit. Within hours, they located a dead server routed through 3 proxy IPs, all circling back to a nondescript building in western Arizona. Owned by a trust, Denning's name nowhere in sight, but the paper trail stank of his fingerprints. The building was disguised as a data consultancy company. No signage, no website, no employees registered. Monroe's voice was clear. "We raid it. First light. But at midnight, the facility burned to the ground. Fire crews reported the blaze as electrical malfunction. No survivors. No evidence." Monroe stood at the smoldering remains the next morning, breathing in the smoke. "They knew we were coming," Delgado cursed. We're being watched. Monroe's eyes scanned the hills. She could feel it, eyes behind trees, in vans, in screens, but something had shifted. They weren't chasing ghosts anymore. They were drawing them out. And next time, Monroe promised herself, the cameras wouldn't blink. She would not miss. The morning after the fire, Monroe sat in her car outside Willow Creek Transitional Home, staring at the steering wheel. The smoke from the destroyed data hub still clung to her jacket. Her fingers tapped anxiously against the leather. Everything they had built, the server link, the footage, the shell companies, was gone in the blink of an eye. But she wasn't beaten. Not yet. Inside, Anna and Kelsey were eating cereal, their legs swinging under the table in silent rhythm. Monroe watched them from the hallway, seeing the fragile calm they were building for themselves. They were survivors, yes, but they were also witnesses. More than that, they were evidence, untouched, unbent. Diana sat nearby, folding clean laundry with quiet care. When she spotted Monroe, she offered a tired but genuine smile. "She's sleeping through the night now," she whispered. "First time in years." Monroe nodded. "She's brave." Diana touched the side of her temple. "Braver than most adults I've met." Monroe walked over to the girls and knelt beside them. "Anna, do you still have the recorder?" Anna tilted her head. "Unsure," Monroe clarified. "The little device you used to record Rachel. Do you still have it?" Anna looked at Kelsey, then slowly stood. She led Monroe back to her room, pulled a stuffed animal off her bed, and unzipped its back. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a small, scratched audio recorder. "I forgot," she said quietly. Monroe took it gently. "Would you let us listen?" Anna nodded, clutching the bear. Back at the precinct, Delgado hooked the recorder to a secure laptop. The files were old, distorted, and several seemed corrupted. But one, labeled Night 7, played cleanly. The voice of Rachel Ellington pierced the room like acid. "She's not yours to care about, Diana. She's just a number. A check. You start feeling sorry for her, you lose track of what's real." Then, another voicemail, calm, precise. "She's due in 2 weeks. Candlepoint will prep her. Make sure she's quiet. You've been warned before." Delgado froze. "That's Denning. It's him." Monroe leaned forward. 2 weeks. That was before Anna disappeared. This was the transaction. The next voice was barely audible, a whisper between gasps. "I don't want to go. Anna." The room went silent. Delgado exhaled. "This changes everything." They were in direct contact, Rachel and Denning. "There's a clear plan, a timeline, a method." Monroe stared at the screen. "We have a voice." From the grave. No, she didn't waste time. The audio was encrypted, copied, and submitted to the DOJ, the FBI, and the State Attorney General's office. Within hours, calls poured in. Candlepoint was reopened as a federal case. Josiah Pratt was moved to a high-security facility. Witness protection agents were dispatched to Willow Creek. But there was one more thing. Delgado found it. A final file on the recorder, hidden in a corrupted segment. He cleaned the audio, rewired the feed. What emerged chilled them to the bone. A location. Not coordinates, but a phrase. Blackwell Farm. Under the blue barn. Third hatch. Monroe blinked. That wasn't Candlepoint. That's something else. Delgado pulled up a map. Blackwell Farm went defunct in 2015. Seized in a property scandal, tied to a charity Denning once sat on the board for. But it was never sold. Still sitting there. Secluded. No utilities on record. You think they're using it? I think it was the backup plan. When the cameras blinked, and people started asking questions, they left that afternoon with 2 agents in tow and a warrant in hand. The drive to Blackwell Farm was long and quiet, framed by dying crops and rusted fences. The blue barn stood out like a sore thumb, fresh paint on a rotting structure, a facade against time. Monroe's gun was drawn as they entered. The air was stale, sharp with chemicals. Inside, the barn appeared empty until they found the hatch. Delgado pulled it open. A staircase, steep and narrow, descended into darkness. Flashlights on. The underground level was a concrete box, 20 feet wide, 30 feet long. Along one wall, cots, neatly arranged. Medical cabinets, restraints, the smell of antiseptic, and fear. In the far corner, a whiteboard, faded writing, names, Anna, Kelsey, Jameer, Lila, and others, dozens. Monroe staggered back. It was a sorting center. Like a warehouse, they combed the space. Files, syringes, labeled bags. Monroe found a hidden shelf behind a loose panel full of ID cards, most of them fakes. But some were real. Kids marked, cleared. Others marked, disposed. She swallowed hard. Delgado stepped into a side room, then called out. Joan. She followed his voice and saw them photographs. Tacked to the wall, dozens of them. Children at different ages, some smiling, some pale, thin, too quiet. In the center, a photo of Kelsey, much younger, in a hospital gown. And beside it Anna, still, eyes open, staring straight into the lens. It was dated 2 months before her escape. She was scheduled, Monroe whispered. But something changed. Delgado nodded. She became too visible. Diana started asking questions. CPS flagged the address. She got lucky, Monroe said. She got away. But these others, Delgado closed his eyes. They didn't. By nightfall, the facility had been secured. Crime scene tape surrounded the barn. Media vans hovered at a distance, restrained by legal threats and silence. But inside Monroe's heart, something cracked. She knew now. This wasn't one ring. It wasn't one operation. It was systemic, layered, funded, and it wasn't over. Not yet. Back at Willow Creek, Monroe placed the recorder on Anna's nightstand. You were brave, she told her. You saved lives. Anna didn't speak. She just reached out, took Monroe's hand, and held it tightly like a child reaching across a chasm of silence. And finding, finally, someone waiting on the other side. Rain tapped against the windows of Willow Creek, like tiny fingers begging to be heard. Inside, the halls were quiet, the soft hum of fluorescent lights the only company. Anna sat at the end of the hallway in a plastic chair, her arms wrapped around her knees. A toy cassette player rested in her lap, an old, clunky thing donated by a kind nurse who thought she might like music. But Anna didn't play songs. She recorded silence. At first, it had puzzled Monroe. Then she realized Anna was listening for patterns, for things others ignored. That night, Monroe visited the lab where the audio files from the Blackwell recorder had been analyzed. Delgado greeted her with a grim nod. You're gonna want to hear this. He pressed play. A low humming filled the speakers, electrical, mechanical, and faintly rhythmic. Then, behind it, a sound barely distinguishable to the human ear. 3 sharp clicks. Then a pause. Then again 3 clicks. 1 pause, 1 long beep. It's not random, Delgado said. It's code. Morse. Monroe leaned in. What's it say? He adjusted the pitch, boosted the signal, and ran it through the translator. The message flashed on screen. Still here. Help. Blue room. Monroe's breath caught. It's not a record of the past. Someone's transmitting live. Delgado nodded. We cross-referenced the beacon signal. It's bouncing through 3 repeater towers. Ending near the Arizona-Nevada border. There's only one facility within range that still has underground access and doesn't appear on any current zoning maps. Monroe read the name aloud. Ravenhill Research Compound. It was supposed to be shut down after the biotech scandal 10 years ago, Delgado said. Turns out, it never was, just changed hands, quietly. Denning? Monroe asked. Can't trace it directly. But 2 of the holding companies tied to it list former Candle Point board members as trustees. She stood. Let's move. The drive was long, hours through pitch-black desert roads. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much left to say. Every step they'd taken had led to this one final door, one final truth. They approached Ravenhill just after midnight. A single security light buzzed above a rusted gate, its motion sensors already dead. They scaled the fence quietly, flashlights off. Monroe's heart thudded as they moved through the overgrown pathway that led to the side entrance. The door had a keypad. Kelsey's drawing came back to her, a crude keypad with a code written beside it, 7313. She typed it in. Click. The door opened. Inside, the air was colder than expected. Sterile. Too clean. As they moved through the first hallway, Monroe noticed the faint vibration under her feet. Something was operating below ground. They followed the hum down a narrow stairwell. Each level they passed became darker. The walls less polished, more industrial. Finally, at the third sublevel, they found it. A steel door marked, Blue Room. Monroe looked at Delgado. Ready? He nodded. She opened the door. The room was lined with transparent partitions, each one a tiny cell. Some were empty. Others held signs of recent occupants, blankets, books, a stuffed toy. In the farthest cell sat a boy, maybe 9 years old. Thin, pale, with frightened eyes. When he saw them, he didn't move. He just stared. Monroe stepped forward. It's okay. We're here to help. He slowly reached toward the intercom button and pressed it. His voice cracked through the speaker. Are you real? She smiled, tears welling. Yes, sweetheart, we're real. Behind them, a sound movement. Delgado spun, weapon raised. From a shadowed alcove, a man emerged. Not Denning. Older, balding, eyes rimmed with sleepless red. You don't understand, he rasped. They'll come for me if I talk. Monroe recognized him. Dr. Theodore Lane. A name long buried in the Candlepoint files. One of their original consultants. You're already in hell, Monroe said. Might as well give the devil a name. Lane shook, his hands twitching. There were dozens, taken from holding centers like Brookfield. Transferred here for testing. Behavior conditioning. Voice suppression. We were funded through medical grants, disguised as cognitive therapy studies. And Denning, Monroe asked. Denning was the handler. He chose who was expendable. Monroe stared him down. Where is he now? Lane's voice dropped to a whisper. Gone rogue. Even we don't know. He doesn't trust anyone anymore. Delgado looked around. How many kids are still here? Lane gestured shakily. Only 3. The rest were moved last month. Where? Monroe demanded. Lane trembled. I don't know. They never tell me. Monroe pushed past him and began unlocking cells. Each child looked at her with equal parts, hope and suspicion. But when they stepped into the hallway, they held her hand. She was real. Outside, the first rays of dawn crept over the desert. They called for emergency extraction, federal backup, medical units. Within the hour, Ravenhill was swarming with agents. Lane was taken into custody. The children were wrapped in blankets, checked by paramedics, and given stuffed animals from the trauma response kit. One little girl, barely 4, clutched Monroe's sleeve. Can I go home now? Monroe knelt. We're going to find you a home. A safe one. The girl smiled, the kind of smile that comes only after long, dark silence. Back at Willow Creek, Monroe sat with Anna and Kelsey. We found more, she said softly. 3 more. Anna's eyes widened. Are they okay? They will be, thanks to you. Delgado entered, holding the recorder. We decoded the last file. It wasn't just a cry for help. He pressed play. Denning's voice crackled through. If they come close, clean it all. Burn the records. Silence the witnesses. Then another voice, Rachel's. What about the girl? She won't remember. And if she does, no one will believe her. Monroe turned to the girls. They were wrong. And in that moment, with the truth echoing from a child's toy recorder, justice no longer felt like a dream. It felt like a promise. The courtroom buzzed with the energy of disbelief, anger, and reckoning. Cameras weren't allowed, but the gallery was packed, journalists scribbling notes, victims' advocates sitting shoulder to shoulder with survivors, and agents from state and federal agencies standing in silent formation along the back wall. The walls echoed with whispered names: Anna, Kelsey, Jameer, Lila. For so long, they were just whispers. Now, they were the foundation of a case that threatened to tear down a network built in shadow. Officer Joan Monroe sat at the prosecutor's table beside Delgado and a federal attorney named Morris. She wore her badge on her lapel, but this time it felt heavier than usual. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a legacy. Josiah Pratt entered in chains, his posture straight, expression unreadable. Lane was behind him, trembling and hunched. The charges ranged from conspiracy to child endangerment, human trafficking, and obstruction of justice. But everyone in that room knew they were hunting a bigger ghost. Marshall Denning. Still missing. Still pulling strings, or so they suspected. As the trial began, Monroe took the stand first. She detailed the investigation, how it began with a neighbor's complaint about noise and ended with a nationwide web of abuse, secrecy, and bureaucratic rot. She presented the audio files, the photos from Candlepoint and Blackwell Farm, and perhaps most damning of all, the final transcript from the recorder Denning never meant to be heard. When the courtroom listened to his voice, the cold, methodical way he referred to children as inventory, there was a collective breath held across the room. When Rachel's voice followed, dismissing Anna as forgettable, you could hear the gasps, the shifting of feet, the burn of rage building in the gallery. But then the final exhibit was played. Anna's whisper from inside the recorder. "I don't want to go." A silence fell over the court that even the judge didn't break for 30 seconds. Later that day, Kelsey took the stand, dressed in a soft lavender blouse and gripping the edge of the witness box like it was the last solid thing in the world. She told her story not with dramatic flair, but with brutal, heartbreaking simplicity. "They said I was lucky to be chosen," she began. "But it didn't feel like luck." She explained the flickering lights, the camera blinks, the coded language the staff used. She described the night Jameer vanished, how they told her he was transferred, how she knew he never came back. "I used to count the days between disappearances. First it was 30, then 20, then 10. Her voice cracked. Then it was my turn. The defense didn't cross-examine. They knew better. In the hall outside the courtroom, Monroe sat on a bench, staring down at her notepad, her eyes unfocused. Diana sat beside her. "They're listening, you know." Monroe looked up. "The jury, the press, the people in this building, they're really listening." Monroe offered a tired smile. "Took long enough." Diana's eyes moistened. "Anna wants to testify." Monroe blinked. "Is she ready?" Diana shrugged. "She's scared. But she said if Kelsey could do it, so could she." That afternoon, Anna took the stand. The courtroom held its breath again. She sat small in the chair, legs swinging. Her stuffed bear, now cleaned and repaired, sat on her lap. She clutched it as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel used to say we were broken toys, that nobody wanted us. She said they were fixing us." "And who was they, Anna?" the prosecutor asked. She hesitated. "Mr. Denning. He wore gloves, even when it was hot. And he always called us by numbers, not names." The prosecutor leaned closer. "What number were you?" 17. The silence in the room was absolute. She looked over at Monroe. "But I have a name. Anna. My name is Anna." Monroe swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Anna continued. "He told Rachel that if I ever remembered too much, they'd make me forget. But I didn't forget. I remembered. I wrote it down. I hid it in my bear." "Why did you hide it?" "Because I knew someone would come. Someone good." "And did they?" She nodded, smiling softly. She knocked on the door. That smile broke the jury. That smile made headlines. That smile sparked calls to reopen other closed facilities and pushed multiple state agencies into federal oversight. The verdict for Pratt and Lane came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would follow, but Monroe already knew. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Back at the precinct, Delgado threw a thick envelope on her desk. Anonymous tip. Came in this morning, postmarked from Phoenix. Inside were flight manifests, offshore banking statements, Surveillance photos of Denning walking through an airport in Venezuela just 6 weeks ago. Monroe cursed. He's still moving. Delgado nodded. But he's bleeding. Every step we take, we cut off another one of his shadows. That night, Monroe returned to Willow Creek. Anna and Kelsey were asleep in the same room. 2 beds pushed together under fairy lights strung across the ceiling. She watched them for a moment, then stepped outside onto the porch. Diana followed. "You ever sleep?" she asked. Monroe chuckled. "Not really. You think it's over?" "No," Monroe said, looking at the stars. "But now the world knows what to listen for." Diana leaned on the railing beside her. "What happens next?" Monroe looked at the recorder in her hand. It was turned off now. Silent. "We keep recording," she said, "and we don't stop until every whisper becomes a roar." Courtroom lights glowed like spotlights on a stage. Rachel Ellington appeared small and hollowed in the witness stand, her rose-printed blouse dull, mascara smeared. Her signature silk robe had been replaced by a subdued prison-issued cardigan. The family dog set loose to lie at her feet was no longer there. Joan Monroe watched from the prosecution table. Her palms were cool and steady. Every breath Rachel drew counted, each one inching her closer to reckoning. The prosecutor's voice was firm. "Miss Ellington, you stand accused of aiding and abetting child trafficking, conspiring with Marshall Denning, and abusing Anna. How do you plea?" Rachel's shaky voice answered, "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her husband William sat in the gallery, rigid as marble. No contact, no whisper, just that cold stare. The testimony began. Monroe stepped up. "I served the initial welfare check," she stated. "I found Anna chained, confined. The implications of what I discovered that night triggered this investigation." Monroe presented photos of the room, the rusty bolt, the stained mattress, the smell still fresh on film. She watched Rachel's face crumble. That image of Anna's pale form chained to the wall, eyes mute, pleading, hit harder than any testimony could. Next was Diana. She spoke bravely, her voice clean. "I kept Anna's drawings. I kept a record. I kept truth alive. Even when I was too afraid to speak." She held up one final paper. Anna's drawing of 2 hands reaching through bars. "This was a warning," Diana explained. "I want those bars gone." Then Kelsey took the stand, her yellow dress gone, her stance quieter but stronger. She spoke of the children lost, the flickers of lights, the vanishings at candlepoint, and she ended with one sentence. "Rachel did nothing. The defense tried. Once." Their cross-examination circled, dipped, but ultimately could not rise. When Monroe returned to the stand to close, she didn't point fingers. She held silence. Rachel Ellington kept a child locked, starved her voice, and silenced her screams. But this, she gestured to Anna and Kelsey seated at the front with Diana. "This is the kind of truth that cannot stay hidden." Closing arguments followed, and then the jury withdrew. The gallery held its breath. When they returned, the foreman's voice hit like a hammer. "Guilty." Rachel's knees buckled. William lunged for her, but Monroe stayed back, her mind on Anna and Kelsey. In the final moments, as sentencing was set, Rachel faced decades. But the courtroom wasn't filled with glee. It was filled with sorrow that reached deeper than justice. Children had disappeared, lives broken, silence tolerated too long. Later, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Anna, clutching her bear, refused the cameras. Instead, she turned to Monroe and spoke, quietly firm. "Justice doesn't always look like you think. But today, it's real." Monroe nodded. That evening, at Willow Creek, Anna and Kelsey sat side by side. A new mural blossomed on the wall. A house with open doors, children laughing, and sunshine pouring through every window. Monroe wiped away tears as she stood. "You deserve that," she whispered. And though the journey ahead would be long, Chapter 13 closed a critical door. Justice was no longer whispering. It roared. In recent days, the quiet halls of Willow Creek had begun to hum again, not with alarms or fear, but with life slowly returning. From the cafeteria where children timidly giggled over shared snacks, to the library where Anna and Kelsey huddled with a reading tutor, an echo of healing threaded through the home. Officer Monroe arrived early one morning, coffee in hand, to find Anna perched on the front steps. She had a new sketchbook, thick with fresh pages. A sunrise painted in crayons glowed from the top sheet. She looked up at Monroe, eyes bright with concentration and guarded hope. It was the first morning she'd poured joy into her art. Monroe knelt beside her. "That's beautiful. Do you want to tell me about it?" Anna considered carefully. "The sun climbs again," she said softly. "And today, it warms us." Monroe's throat tightened. "Yes." She placed a hand gently on Anna's shoulder. "Today, and every day you choose to shine." Oh. Inside the home's therapy room, federal agents and CPS staff gathered around the walls, now plastered with dozens of children's drawings, pre-treatment maps, scattered faces, broken crayon bars. They were collecting evidence, reproductions of each image, a testimony that only a child could craft with unfiltered truth. One voice echoed above the chatter. Kelsey's. She spoke softly, but confidently, as she guided a volunteer group through turning children's art into installations for their new awareness campaign. Hear the silence. Her voice carried resonance she'd never known. Monroe watched, silent and proud. Meanwhile, files on Candle Point, Blackwell Farm, Ravenhill, and other shady facilities were being pulled, compiled, and handed over to state legislators. A federal task force was forming, tasked with auditing all unregulated children's care and wellness programs. The public needed to know how easily a network like this had survived in plain sight. Monroe found Delgado in his office, tallying shipping crates packed with case files for the Justice Department. He looked up, eyes weary, but smiling. "You think they'll act?" he asked. "They will," she answered firmly. "Once they see the human cost, the silence these children lived under, they'll understand it's not just about regulations, it's about humanity." Late that afternoon, Anna invited Monroe and Kelsey into her new space, a repurposed corner of the home filled with pillows, stuffed animals, books, and a low round table. Anna began to narrate a story she'd been writing, a simple tale about two friends who escaped a dark castle and planted a garden under the open sky. Monroe and Kelsey listened, enthralled. When Anna finished, she closed the sketchbook and offered them each a page. On it, a tiny house at dawn. Children standing outside holding hands. The sun rising behind them. Monroe looked at the picture. "This is your story," she said. "And it will reach others." Weeks later, the community rallied. A small memorial stand was set up in town square, blooming with flowers and crayon art framed behind glass. Citizens came to leave tokens, flowers, chalk drawings, messages like, "We will listen," and "Never silent." Monroe stood nearby, watching neighbors, parents, even local school children place their contributions. It felt like redemption. Like the hush had finally been pierced, she noticed Diana approaching, carrying a small photo of Anna hugging her bear, taken a few months earlier. "She deserves this," Diana said, eyes glistening. "Thank you for listening." Monroe reached out, touching Diana's arm. "You listened first." Later, at home, Anna was asleep on Kelsey's bed. The two of them tangled in blankets and soft pronouns of friend and sister. Monroe tucked them in, brushing back loose curls from Anna's forehead. She pressed a gentle kiss there and whispered, "You are heard." As she pulled back, she looked at the mural above the beds, the house with open doors, the sun spilling through every window, children running free. It was no longer a hopeful fantasy. It was real. Outside the window, the sky deepened into dusk, painted with lavender and rose. In that fading light, Monroe folded a case file and placed it on the desk marked closed. Next to it, she placed Anna's sketchbook with a father's note, "Let the art speak." Monroe stepped back. The house was quiet, peaceful. Her phone beeped with a new message. Federal approval for the oversight program was granted. A new chapter was beginning. Monroe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what had been done and what lay ahead. From silence came sound. From fear came voice, and that voice they would never silence again. Late summer, sun dripped gold across Silver Oak. The neighborhood, once sterile and vigilant, felt different. People greeted each other with genuine smiles. Some still glanced at the white houses with quiet respect. But the air held a pulse. Community. Awakened. Officer Joan Monroe stepped out of her car at the precinct, the badge on her uniform catching light like a beacon. This was her first day back on active duty, no longer just an investigator, but a recognized agent of change. Bureaucrats had debated her return. Some called it symbolic. She called it necessary. Inside, Delgado greeted her at the entrance. His grin was weary but proud. "They're ready to see you," he said. Her office had changed. Stacks of files were gone. In their place, children's drawings, Anna's sunrise house, Kelsey's yellow dress, Jameer's laughing face. Under her nameplate, a small plaque read, "For those who couldn't speak." She settled in and opened a new sealed folder waiting on her desk. Oversight Protocols, Silver Oak Region. She drew a breath. This was the next step. A knock came. Diana entered with 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering one. Monroe nodded, voice thick. "Thank you." They shared a moment. No need to say more. Later that morning, Monroe stepped into the briefing room. A cluster of state troopers, CPS workers, attorneys, and social workers sat waiting. At the front, Deputy Director Grant stood, nodding to Monroe to begin. She cleared her throat. "Today marks a turning point. We're implementing the first round of federally mandated oversight for unregulated children's care programs. That includes wellness centers, small shelters, and private placements. Every facility in this region will be inspected unannounced." A wave of looks passed across the room, some apprehensive, some determined. "I'll lead the team," Monroe continued. "This isn't about writing citations. It's about ensuring no child disappears into silence again." Questions followed. Funding, logistics, training, mental health support for inspectors encountering trauma. Monroe answered with clarity. "We have trauma-informed interrogators," she said. "We have child psychologists, and we have a zero-tolerance policy on cover-ups. If something looks off, we won't walk away." Afterward, people lingered, volunteers, staff, advocates, all drawn to Monroe as they once were to a lighthouse in darkness. At Willow Creek that evening, Anna and Kelsey greeted her at the gate. Anna held her sketchbook. "Look," she said simply. Monroe flipped through, pages of bedtime stories, brave nights, sunny gardens, all with hidden symbols. A star, a yellow dress, a hand reaching out. "These are for your project," Anna said. Monroe lifted them gently. "These tell the truth better than any report." Kelsey nodded shyly. "We want to help kids like us." Monroe's heart cracked. "You already are." Later, she reviewed the updated oversight roster. The first facility on the list was a daycare in Bakersfield. A tiny place with great reviews but no licensing. Monroe frowned. "We'll go." A week later, Monroe visited the daycare with a team. Children played, watched cartoons, giggled in controlled chaos. Everything seemed fine until she noticed the sticky residue on the doorframe. Low to the ground. A child's sticky fingers? She smelled something. Rotten. She moved carefully. Found a hidden storage room behind a cabinet. Inside, mattresses in a single stacked line, crude restraints, faint crayons. Some that Stella and others had used at Willow Creek. It was a holding area. Monroe called for backup immediately. Another child had slipped letters under a door 2 nights ago, hidden in her lunchbox. "Please don't hide us again." Monroe's team apprehended the director. The child worker resigned immediately, eyes wet with shame. Back at headquarters, Monroe filed the initial report. Justice was no longer about closing cases, it was building safeguards. That evening, Monroe sat with Anna and Kelsey on the Willow Creek porch. Fireflies danced around them like pinpricks of promise. "Can you feel it?" Anna asked. "Feel what? That the silence is changing?" Monroe's voice cracked. "I feel it." They sat, watching the lights flicker softly. Monroe thought of Denning still out there. But now the world was listening. Now oversight would catch ghosts of silence. Monroe gently placed her hand over Anna's. "We'll keep listening," she whispered. "Always." And in that quiet vow, the shadows retreated a little further. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows at Willow Creek, turning the dust motes in the air into floating sparks of gold. Diana stood at the counter, her hands busy kneading dough for biscuits. The rhythmic pressing, soft and purposeful, felt healing. Flour dusted her palms, like powdered hope. Monroe stepped in quietly, watching her. She carried an envelope thick, official. "Morning," Diana said softly, glancing over. Her smile was gentle, fatigued, but real. Monroe placed the envelope on the table. "You earned this," she said. Diana's brow furrowed as she opened it. Inside was a formal letter of commendation from the Department of Child Welfare, recognizing her bravery in the Ellington case, affirming her integrity, and offering her a position as a child advocacy liaison. Tears sprang in Diana's eyes. She closed them for a moment, breathing deep. I don't know what to say." "Say you accept," Monroe replied. "You saved Anna, you helped us save the others, and now you can save many more." For a moment, Diana stared at the letter like it was a lifeline. Then she nodded, voice breaking. Yes, they hugged not mothers and daughters, but two souls scarred by silence, now bound by purpose. Later that morning, Monroe walked through the courtyard with Kelsey and Anna. The two girls giggled over chalk drawings they'd created: a sun, a garden gate, names written in block letters: Kelsey, Anna, Hope. Monroe knelt beside them. "What are you drawing today?" Anna pointed up. "A safe place where kids don't disappear, where people trust them." Monroe smiled. "Perfect." They stood up and walked together, heads bent over the drawings, no longer shadows, but pieces of a new quilt. In the afternoon, Diana arrived at the precinct for orientation in her new role. Monroe introduced her to the team: therapists, caseworkers, investigators. Heads nodded when her name was mentioned. A silence followed, as if the room recognized in her not just a former maid, but a champion of justice. Diana swallowed. "I'm here to make sure there's always someone willing to listen and to act." Monroe stood beside her. "We believe you." That evening, Monroe returned to her office. On her desk lay stacks of reports flagged by the new oversight protocols. Some led to administrative corrections. Others, like the daycare in Bakersfield, to full criminal investigations. But each file represented a child saved from silence. As she filed them, her phone buzzed with a secure message and encrypted tip. Denning seen in South America. Possibly Quito, Ecuador. Pending extradition. Monroe closed her eyes. Not over yet, but moving forward. Back at Willow Creek, Anna and Kelsey waited on the porch, holding a new chalkboard sign. "Thank you, Diana." When Diana stepped out, cloak of her uniform crisp, Anna ran forward, tugging at her hand. Diana knelt, brushing Anna's hair gently. "Thank you for being brave," she whispered. Kelsey hugged her around the waist. Diana's eyes filled, this time with quiet pride. Monroe watched from the doorway. This was redemption, not dramatized, not televised, but quietly lived, a life restored. Later, the four of them sat on the grass under fairy lights. Diana held the biscuit basket. Monroe held a glass of iced tea. The air was warm, sweet with fragrant night-blooming jasmine. Anna looked up, sleepy but determined. "Do you think he'll be caught?" Monroe offered a gentle nod. "We're tracking him, and now, with more eyes watching, fewer doors will stay closed." Diana squeezed her hand. "Beyond administration, we'll bring healing." Monroe exhaled. This wasn't just law enforcement anymore, it was care. Sustained, tender, deliberate. As the night deepened, Diana shared stories of her childhood: a mother who mourned too quietly, a father who couldn't afford to listen. She spoke of Anna's drawings rescuing her, of her visions for safe homes everywhere. Monroe looked on, warmed. The child she once saved had saved her too, taught her the price of attention, the currency of care. In that dusk, burden and healing entwined. Silence had been broken, and redemption, gentle and real, stood at the center. It wasn't the ending, it was a foundation. A promise that in the quiet, someone would always hear and act. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of the Willow Creek common room, illuminating dust particles dancing in the gentle morning air. Anna sat at the low craft table, clutching her sketchbook as if it held the world. Her drawings had always spoken, sometimes louder than words. But today, something deeper stirred within her. Diana entered quietly, carrying a tray with warm apple slices and herbal tea. "Good morning, sunshine," she whispered, setting the tray down. Anna looked up, eyes serious, no longer vacant. Kelsey hovered beside her, holding her hand. Monroe appeared at the doorway, sensing a quiet intensity. She approached slowly. "Morning, girls," she said. "How are we doing today?" Anna took a breath. It wasn't for pencils or crayons. It was time. "I want to tell my story," she said, voice soft but unwavering. Silence fell. The adults glanced at each other, filled with reverence. Diana set the tray aside. Monroe sat down, giving Anna her full attention. Anna opened the sketchbook to a blank page. With a steady hand, she wrote, "My name is Anna. They tried to make me invisible. But I stood." The words felt small in the magnitude of her experience, but enormous in its courage. Monroe swallowed. "That is powerful, Anna." Tears glistened in Anna's eyes. She looked at Kelsey. Together, they drew two figures, one reaching for words, another offering them back. Anna nodded. "I talk now, because no one should suffer in silence." Diana wept quietly beside them. Monroe recorded the moment in her heart. No badge. No report. Just a girl reclaiming her voice. That afternoon, Monroe met with the new oversight team in a clean, sunlit conference room. She placed Anna's written statement at the center of the table. Social workers, educators, CPS officers stared at it. "This is what survivors sound like," Monroe said. "This is our guiding star." One by one, they pledged to build systems where children, especially the invisible ones, would always be heard. In the evening, the Willow Creek home hosted a small gathering of staff, volunteers, and children. As twilight deepened, Anna took the painted stage, a simple wooden platform under fairy string lights, and read her statement aloud. "My name is Anna. They tried to make me invisible. But I'm here. And I will always speak." A hush followed her pause, then applause, genuine, healing, overflowing. Later, Monroe walked her back to her room. "You were brave," she whispered. Anna hugged her softly. "You helped me find words." Monroe realized that words were more than sentences, they were lifelines. That night, Anna slept with her sketchbook open on her nightstand, pencil beside it. Diana knelt to add a bookmark. A page that now held her words. Outside, stars trembled in the sky, tiny witnesses to a promise fulfilled. Anna had found her voice, and with it, she changed everything. The kitchen at Willow Creek hummed with warmth. The scent of roasted turkey mingled with cinnamon and laughter, a far cry from the cold dinners of the past. Anna and Kelsey stood on step stools, setting cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes on the long table. Their hands moved with purpose, threading turkey platters between bowls of green beans and pies, like weaving threads of belonging. Monroe entered, carrying a tray of golden rolls. She paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. Children paired with volunteers, laughter rising across generations. Diana at the head of the table, carving turkey, her face glowing in gratitude and pride. Monroe took a moment, closing her eyes. This evening was the living proof that redemption and healing could flourish when someone listened and stayed. She set the tray beside Diana. The room quieted for a heartbeat. Diana looked up. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said, voice thick with emotion. Anna chimed in. "We have so much to say thank you for." The chatter rose again. Monroe moved through the crowd, greeting families, some new, some still cautious, but all moving forward. When the meal was served, the noise softened. Plates clinked. Murmurs turned reflective. Monroe took her seat beside Anna and Kelsey. Across from them, Diana poured another helping of mashed potatoes with a flourish and a smile. "Would anyone like to share something they're thankful for?" Monroe asked, glancing around. A teenage volunteer spoke first. "For second chances." She looked at Diana, and then at Anna and Kelsey. "You two remind me what it means to really care." A single father, attending with his son, nodded. For people who don't give up. Thank you. When it came to the girls, Kelsey stood. I'm thankful for family, she said, voice steady. Real family. Anna's eyes glistened. She licked her lips and whispered, as though the whole room might dissolve with her words. I'm thankful for being seen. Silence greeted her. Then the room exhaled. Applause. Soft tears. Monroe felt light in her chest, like a burden had dissolved. Later, Monroe found a quiet moment with Diana, by the windows overlooking the yard, wrapped in fairy lights and cold air. You did something amazing, Diana said softly. We did, Monroe corrected. You did. Diana pressed the commendation letter in her hands, softened by use. I just listened. Monroe shook her head. You did more. You believed. You gave Anna a voice. Diana exhaled, leaning into Monroe's shoulder. I gave myself one, too. When the final dishes were cleared and children pressed their faces against the windows waving goodnight to volunteers departing, Monroe stood outside with Anna and Kelsey. The stars overhead were crisp in silence. Anna held Monroe's hand. What's next? She asked quietly. Monroe looked to the night sky, then back at Anna. Now we name the future. Kelsey knelt beside a small sapling planted earlier that day, the hope tree, decorated with paper hearts and drawings. Anna produced a small heart of blue crayon, carefully taped to a branch. On it she had written a single word. Home. Monroe smiled through tears. That's the best name of all. As night deepened, the three stood beneath the branches, under a crowd of silent stars, no longer shadows but together in light, peace growing in every breath. Thanksgiving had given them a new beginning, a home, a voice, a promise. And for Anna, Kelsey, and even Diana and Monroe, it was the kind of love that deserved more than a season. It was forever. The story teaches us that even in the darkest corners of silence and neglect, a single voice once heard can ignite a wave of change. It reminds us that justice is not only about punishment, but about healing, listening, and standing up for those too small or too scared to speak. Through Anna's bravery, Diana's redemption, and Monroe's relentless pursuit of truth, we learn that true strength lies in compassion, and that every child deserves not only safety, but to be seen, heard, and believed.